Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello, welcome to another episode of Creative Piecemeal Podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Today, I am really excited to be joined by one of my friends and former grad school colleagues, Dr. Cynthia Phelps, has cultivated a unique perspective for the importance of a foundation in fine arts appreciation and skills through her journey as music teacher educator, public school music educator, choral and instrumental performer, church musician, independent music studio instructor. She has a breadth and depth of experience teaching music courses and working with students of all ages. She holds a PhD in music education with an emphasis in learning, teaching, and curriculum from the University of Missouri. And she has presented research and workshops at conferences in Missouri and beyond. Welcome to the show.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome. So as you may know, since you're an avid listener of the podcast, one of the questions I like to start with is who or what inspired you? And in your case, who or what inspired you to become a musician, an educator, and fun fact, now a podcaster?
Well, I began playing piano when I was in second grade. And I actually was one of those kids that loved taking piano lessons. My journey with music began when I was in elementary school, and my grandmother was also a piano player, and she sang in church, and so I had that influence from her. Neither of my parents played piano. Neither of them were musicians. They liked to sing, but neither of them read music, but she really was my inspiration getting into music. And so then I was in choir and I was in band all through high school, and in college, I decided to become a music education major. And that continued into graduate school. I didn't know if I really wanted to be a teacher. There were a lot of areas of music that I was interested in. I wanted to maybe get a degree in combining music with mass media, but I ended up choosing the music ed path. And whenever I got into grad school, I did my graduate work at Georgia State University in Atlanta. And one of my professors really inspired me to get excited about teaching. And so that is the path that I have stayed on. And when I decided to go to pursue my doctorate in music education, my mentor at the University of Missouri inspired me to take an interest in research. I've always enjoyed writing, and some of my most inspiring teachers were creative writing teachers, not just musicians, but not just my music teachers, but also my creative writing teachers. And so I've always enjoyed digging in and reading articles and really taking a deeper look at subjects. And so I felt like I really had found my niche whenever I got into my PhD program, and being immersed in this culture of critical thinking and researching music and kind of peeling back those layers, that has been exciting to me for over the past 10 years. So that's where my inspiration has come from. And also one of my College of Education professors introduced me to the concept of reflective practice. And that in education, that's something that's a standard quality indicator of good teaching, but it's not something in music ed that we talk about a lot. And so I really kind of developed this passion for reflective thinking, and that led into the topic for my dissertation.
Nice. And of course, now you are delving into the world of podcasting. Would you be able to talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. In my pursuit of thinking about reflective practice and what that means outside of music education and within music education, I thought that creating a podcast would be a great way to have an ongoing conversation and share that information and share those ideas. And really, when we engage in reflectivity, it's about storytelling. And podcasting, when I was in college, I also worked at a radio station. And to me, that's a natural extension of that. I worked at an NPR station for 6 years. I was in college for a long time. I have a double major in music education, vocal and instrumental, and a minor in French education. And so I was at a work study college, and one of my jobs on campus was to be a radio announcer at an NPR station. And so it's something that I love, so that taps into my creativity. And I have been inspired by friends like you who have pursued podcasting, some other good friends. I have one friend who has a podcast called Classical Ideas, another friend who collaborates on a podcast called Cocktail Theology. And so I am inspired by this creative outlet for sharing knowledge and engaging in conversations.
Wonderful. Do you have a launch date, or is that forthcoming?
That is forthcoming.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to it. And of course, I will happily promote your podcast. Listeners, Cynthia is brilliant and a wonderful person. So you're going to love what she does.
Thank you. I'm excited about it.
I'm excited for you.
And thank you so much for your encouragement and your coaching on creating the podcast.
Well, you're very welcome. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because today, on the date in which we're recording, is actually the 1 year of my podcast. So it's like, how has it been that long?
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's exciting. So anyway, back to you, because you're the star of the show here. What is one of your most proudest moments, whether it's teaching or otherwise?
I think one of my proudest moments really was completing my doctorate in music education, and looking at the journey to get to that point. Even though I graduated during the pandemic and we did not have a graduation ceremony, there was another colleague of mine. We had been on a journey together from the start. Our journey took a little bit longer than some of our other colleagues, but we were able to go. So we graduated in 2020. We did a virtual graduation. And then in 2021, we were able to go back on campus, and our mentor did a hooding ceremony for us. And just to be able to celebrate that in person on campus, even though it had been a year later from when we had graduated, it felt really good to be able to say we had accomplished that, and what that meant for our careers and pursuing that.
It's wonderful. Yeah, I remember working with you in grad school, and you were always just had such an amazing work ethic and such creative ideas with all of your research. And so another education question, what is a piece of education advice that you always follow, and then one that you ignore?
One piece of education advice I always follow at this point in my career, because it looks very different from when I started out as a young teacher. What I know now, I think if I could take the knowledge I have now and go back to when I was in my early 20s, what a difference that would have made. But looking at my own experiences becoming a PhD, now I can take that, and share that I'm a university supervisor, or when I'm teaching a course, I now reflect more on the work that I do. And that's not something that I did when I was first starting out. It's not something anyone ever talked about. No one at that point in my career, no one was talking about what is your philosophy of teaching and how does that align with your practice, and how do you engage students in that conversation, and how do you help them become critical thinkers. And so that now is the advice that I always follow in being reflective, drawing out those conversations. And right now I'm wearing a lot of different hats. I'm teaching in a virtual learning, elementary learning setting. I'm the chair support team leader for the specials. That's not my favorite label, but for music, art, and PE. And I am the chairperson, and I'm also an adjunct instructor for fifth grade music. I've also had the opportunity this past year to be involved in the curriculum, further developing the curriculum for the elementary music part. It's been interesting, whether I'm working with elementary students virtually, or teaching voice lessons or piano lessons virtually or in person, or working as a university supervisor with pre-service music ed students. I really am across the board. I strive to draw out those conversations and those stories and unpack those. And, this in the fall, I was working with 6 pre-service music ed teachers and having conversations with them, getting them to think a little bit deeper. That's the rule. Those are the rules that I follow now, because I want people to have those conversations that I didn't have when I was younger, that no one was having with me when I was becoming a teacher. And that's not to say I had excellent music teachers, whether it was choir or band or my own music methods undergrad teachers, or in my master's program. But now I know that those are things that we should be talking about. And so I try to draw out those conversations. I ignore, I think, kind of the old thinking that one size fits all. And so I'm seeing that kind of evolution, that development of a different kind of thinking, that where we used to think that the teacher was the dispenser of knowledge and the students were there to just absorb that knowledge. Now it's a collaborative, it's a communal learning environment, and really looking at student-centered learning, I think, is much more important than the way we were taught to teach. That the teacher was the one that had all the answers, and really the students were there to just absorb that knowledge. So I ignore that.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you on both points, on the one you follow and the one you ignore, because, reflecting in your work, and even in your own personal life, is a wonderful way to really get to know yourself and to better yourself and the world around you. And then, of course, like you said, not everything is one size fits all, and you never know what you can learn from somebody.
Absolutely. I learn things from my students, whether, like I said, whether they're elementary age, all the way up through college, up through adults. I learn something from my students all the time.
And speaking of learning, what is a book that you read recently that challenged you, and then a book that inspired you, and a book that you couldn't put down?
Actually, so I've thought about this. I don't know if I have answers for all 3 of those questions, but 2 books that I got recently. One, I learned about the author. It's called Consolations by David Whyte. It's the solace, nourishment, and underlying meaning of everyday words. And he is a poet and an essayist. And I heard about his work in a podcast that I was listening to with my husband called Making Sense with Sam Harris. I've kind of started using this as like a meditation book, but the words that it's everyday words that we just don't even we don't think about anymore because we use them so much, like being alone, beauty, close, courage, disappointment, genius. And he's written this book of essays on those everyday words. So that is inspiring to me. And the way he writes really aligns with my love of being reflective and living a reflective life. So that's one. Another one, and I watched I think it was, I can't remember what network it was on, or streaming service, but it was a book written by Dave Grohl, the lead singer and the lead of the Foo Fighters. It's a book written by his mother, Virginia Grohl. It's called From Cradle to Stage: Stories from the Mothers Who Rocked and Raised Rock Stars. And so he did this documentary. He's gotten into making documentaries. And so he made this documentary with his mother, interviewing these different musicians from all genres and backgrounds and their mothers. And so I got this, and I actually share my mom at one point when she was at my house visiting, I was like, Mom, you need to look at this. This is a really cool book. So she started looking at it. So those are two books that I have right now that I'm using as inspiration and digging into. So those are kind of my main two books right now.
Wonderful. I wrote those down so that we could share that with listeners, but I'm also going to be digging those up soon because they both sound fantastic.
Yes. Again, just kind of looking at things from a different perspective and also uncovering those stories. That's another thing I love. I think that's why reflectivity and reflection just sits so well with me, because I love to hear the stories behind the stories. And as educators, when we pursue reflection, we kind of move through different stages of surface to pedagogical to critical reflection, where we're moving from, am I doing this right? Am I getting my daily lessons right? To this is the right thing to do. And so thinking about that, not only as a teacher, but when we examine our own belief system and our long held beliefs about things, how does that align with our philosophy, our teaching philosophy, and how does that impact the decisions that we're making with our students, with our teaching, in our teaching community? And so it all kind of comes together in this big ball of reflection. And it's about stories, the story behind the stories. Why do we believe what we believe? So that's why I love documentaries about the process of musicians, the story behind the song, the story behind how the people got started, and not just musicians, but artists and creatives. And so I love things like Cradle to Stage, kind of that narrative that we all have. I've also started I listen to a variety of podcasts, but one I started listening to recently was for the show, and just like that, the writer's room. And because I love to hear the process. How did they come up with these stories? Why do we have that story arc? So that's kind of my interest in storytelling.
Nice. Yeah, I agree. The creative process is so interesting. And I also love sort of the nitty gritty of it, and how, what people love, what people don't like, how, some people like having music on while they create. Other people need absolute silence. It's just fascinating.
I am one of those people that, even though I'm a musician, have been a practicing musician when I was younger, I'm more on the education side of it now. I need quiet when I'm working, when I'm writing, when I'm creating. So it's kind of interesting.
And that actually leads so well into the next question, which is, what is your favorite and least favorite parts of the creative process?
I think for me, one of my favorite parts is the planning part. I love the idea of all the possibilities. I love the blank slate. I can create anything. There's no limits. And then on the flip side of that, sometimes that can be overwhelming. Oh, I have all of these ideas. What am I going to do with all of them? So I really think I love to plan. I think I probably love planning more than I actually love the executing, but I'm a planner and I love to plan. I do digital planning. And so whether it comes to things in my personal life or professional life, I love the planning process. And when it comes to the creative process, mapping out, this is what I want to do, this is where I'm going, this is how I'm going to get there. So then it comes down to putting the nose to the grindstone. Then how am I going to execute that every day? So I think that the planning part is probably my favorite part of the creative. And then the end result. Once we've done the hard work, or maybe it's not hard work, but once we've done the work, then the outcome. I visualize this. That's another thing I enjoy, is visualizing what is this project going to look like, and then the actual outcome, and the reflective part of that. Once it's finished, then reflecting on it.
There's a lot of wonderful treats in the creative process to really enjoy, aren't there?
Absolutely. One of the best pieces of advice when I was working on my dissertation, and just learning about the process, was to enjoy the process, enjoy working through all of it, rather than looking at it as a chore and something that was a burden, to really just enjoy that process.
Joy in the journey, I think, is what they say, right?
Yes.
I'm just curious. You said you've been doing some virtual teaching and life looks a little bit different for you lately than it did before. And I was wondering, what's one thing that you've learned from this historic time and has really stuck with you in your life?
One of the things that I've learned in regards to teaching, the virtual learning center that I work with and teach through, they actually had this in place before the pandemic. This was something that they found that there was a need to have this type of learning that was accredited virtually for students who may not want to be in a live setting. And so this was already in place. But as a result of the pandemic, it grew, and they added more grade levels, and they added more teachers and students, and it was a whole learning process for me. I know that there were teachers at all levels that were thrown into virtual learning settings it was something that we weren't prepared for. That's not something that any of us were used to, but it is something I love now. It's not something I ever envisioned. It's something that I enjoy doing. Even though we're not seeing the students in person, and a lot of the work that I do is asynchronous. Any opportunity I have to chat with students via Zoom, and do some group lessons and create that community, it has caused me to dig deep and really have to figure out different ways to teach these students in a different way than I had ever thought, in a creative way, as opposed to live and in person. And there is something to be said about being in person and being part of a creative community in person. But for students who are not able to do that for whatever reason, finding ways to be able to build community with them is just as important as being in person.
It sounds like you've been doing a lot of wonderful work with that.
Yes. It's been a great learning experience and something that I'm really enjoying.
We're going to switch gears here and dig a little deeper into who is Cynthia.
All right.
So, if we were to sneak a peek at your music collection, what are some things we would find?
Oh, goodness. I thought about this a little bit yesterday. I have a very eclectic music collection. One of the things that I enjoy doing each year, there's so many more artists readily available to us now than whenever I was growing up. And not to make myself sound really old, but records and 8-track cassettes were and cassettes were what was available to us, and whatever we saw advertised on TV or going into record stores or what we heard on the radio. And so, there's so many artists available to us now and so many different variations of genres. It really is, it's pretty amazing, and we have such easy access to music. And so I have my listening varies from some hip hop to blues to jazz to classical, just depending on what mood I'm in. There's a good friend of mine who does a podcast, and he started out in Nashville, and he's a singer-songwriter. He actually wrote the music and performed it at our wedding. I also have a former student of mine who is also in Nashville at the time, and I like to listen to some of her music. And one of my favorite things to do is to download the Grammy nominees, download those albums, because then I'm listening to music and artists that I might not have heard of. And so it kind of helps me have an idea of what music is out there. And it also helps me relate to my students. So just a variety of artists and genres. And my husband and my oldest bonus daughter, they like metal. I'm not a huge fan of metal, but as a music educator, I try to keep an open mind. And once in a while, we'll attempt to listen to some metal music.
It'll wake you up on a Monday morning, I'll tell you what.
Absolutely.
Well, it sounds like a great collection, and that's a wonderful tip about listening to the nominees for the Grammys, because like you said, you can really discover a lot of great artists that way.
I've been doing it probably for the past 10 years, as long as they've been available. And then it just kind of keeps me in the loop of what people are listening to.
Well, that's fantastic. So if you could do any other creative art besides what you currently engage in, what would it be?
Probably visual arts. It's something I enjoy. I have several friends who were art majors. A good friend of mine is a professor at University of South Carolina, Columbia. From the time that I was a child, I always enjoyed painting and drawing and expressing myself in a visual arts way. And I think that's why I love collaborating with other creatives and other artists. Whenever I was at the University of Missouri, we had an integrated section where we collaborated with the art and the literacy teacher to bring integrated learning to the undergraduates, the college students. And so I really enjoy collaborating with other disciplines, kind of cross-disciplinary work. But I would say creative work as an artist or as a creative writer. Those are the things that I love doing, or I'm interested in. I also, one of my hobbies, even though I haven't found the balance to carve out a lot of time for it, I love scrapbooking. Whether it's creating actual physical pictures in a physical scrapbook or creating digital photo books. That's one of my creative outlets.
Oh, that's lovely. And they make great gifts for people too.
Yes, absolutely.
You spoke a little bit about how you loved creative writing. If you could be any fictional character, who would that be?
I can't think off the top of my head. Oh, Sherlock Holmes. There you
Ooh,
go. Sherlock
nice.
Holmes. Some of the Sherlock Holmes stories always have intrigued me because of his ability to his genius ability to observe and draw conclusions from his observations. So probably Sherlock Holmes. I also love grim fairy tales. I love the storytelling in those books. Probably a female version of Sherlock Holmes.
Well, as a teacher, you're also having to observe and draw conclusions, much like Sherlock,
Yes.
just without the fun hat.
Yeah, absolutely. I need to come up with a fun hat.
You've reached a lot of success in your life. And of course, you're going to be launching a podcast soon, but everyone has times where they have learned from experiences that are not as great. Would you like to share an experience that you've had, whether it was a concert or a teaching experience that didn't go quite as planned, and what did you learn from it?
It wasn't a teaching experience, but it was a public speaking experience. When I was still at Mizzou and I was still working on my dissertation, they had just started this. It was a competition, the 3-minute thesis.
Oh.
And all we had to do was get up and speak for 3 minutes, which that doesn't seem like a long amount of time. And we just needed to be able to condense our work into something that would be relatable to the general public. It's like an elevator speech. And so I had gone to workshops on this. I had written it out. I had practiced, and whenever I got up to speak, could not remember what I was going to speak about. I stumbled through my words. And afterwards I felt really, I was disappointed, but I reminded myself, okay, this is a learning experience. You don't need to get that nervous about what you're talking about. I knew when it came to defending my dissertation that I would be able to have notes and that I would be successful in that. But that was a little bit, that was a disappointing experience, but also a learning experience, to just trust that the knowledge that I had, the things that I have to share, that I can talk for hours about it, but for 3 minutes, could not remember what I was supposed to talk about.
I don't blame you. I think when someone is put on the spot to talk about something they're so passionate about, 3 minutes is just not enough. It sounds like an interesting concept, though, for a contest, but sounds like a very difficult task.
Yes, it's a lot harder than it sounds.
So, fun question. If you had intro music or a theme song for your life, what would that be?
Well, one of my favorite musicians is Sheryl Crow. And so probably Every Day's a Winding Road, or some other Sheryl Crow song. She's a Missourian, and I relate to her kind of storytelling, and I probably one of her songs.
Yeah, she has a lot of really great storytelling, like you said, in her music.
Absolutely. I enjoy listening to her stories behind the stories, and her collaborative work, and her own journey. And her music is ever since she came out with All I Want to Do. I just have really connected with her storytelling and her style of music. So I would imagine that one of her songs probably would be a good intro theme.
And speaking of themes in our lives, what is a movie that you love that reveals something about you?
I have so many favorites. At Christmas time, I always like to watch. I have three that are I like my must watch movies. One is It's a Wonderful Life. One is White Christmas, and one is A Muppet Christmas Carol.
I love that one.
I always have enjoyed watching movies about A Christmas Carol because I love the storytelling. So those are my three standards for each holiday season. I have to watch those three. And I think I do. It's the storytelling that I appreciate about those. One of my favorite movies from many years ago was When Harry Met Sally. And I think I loved that movie just because of the friendships and the journey that they were on, and listening to the stories of the couples that they interviewed in the movie. So I think for me, any movie that has some really great writing, some good storytelling. I also like kind of psychological thrillers, things that really kind of make you think. I like movies that are comedies, but I also like movies that have a little bit of a twist to it.
I must say, big fan of Muppet Christmas Carol. I didn't have a chance to watch it yet this year, so I might just bust it out in the new year.
Yes. It's never the wrong time to watch that movie.
There you go. Very true. So another fun question. If you could have dinner with any creative person, dead or alive, who would it be and what would you have for the meal?
Maya Angelou. I had the opportunity to listen to her when she was on the campus of University of Missouri. And her ability to storytell and to engage an audience was just incredible. She had no visuals, she had no fancy technology. It was just her sitting on stage. And I remember thinking, I'm in the same room as Maya. I am breathing the same air as Maya Angelou. And just her words were so uplifting and so inspiring. I would have loved the opportunity to sit and have a meal with her. And I would think that it would be whatever she would want. Whatever meal she would want to have, that is what I would have.
That would be fantastic, wouldn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Very inspiring lady for sure. What is something that you are inspired by in the new year?
In this new year, I'm going to have the opportunity to work with some new pre-service music education teachers. And the conversations with them is always inspiring, as well as continuing to work on creating my podcast. So those are things that are inspiring me in my journey of teaching and working in different avenues of education. One of the things that I'm learning is that even if it doesn't look exactly the way I had envisioned it, there are things that I can figure out. There are ways that I can continue to contribute. I can continue having conversations with colleagues. One of the other hats that I'm wearing at the moment is as director of mentor leadership with a program called Music Service Learning. It was developed by one of my former professors from Mizzou, who's at Westchester University now in Pennsylvania. And being able to work with the people who are volunteering to be mentors, as well as the interns for the program, to continue those kind of deeper conversations about teaching. That's always inspiring.
That sounds fantastic. It sounds like you've got a really great year ahead with, like you said, new students and, currently going with all of your teaching and then launching your podcast in the coming months. So On that note, I was curious, if you didn't have any limitations or budgets for a project, what do you think you would do?
I would probably travel more and maybe spend time. I would really love to be able to go to New York if it was depending on the project. If I'm doing some kind of, if it's research for something I'm writing or a project that I'm working on, I would love to be able to travel and kind of do my podcast or my creative work from wherever I was, be a digital nomad. I would look, that would, if money was no hindrance, that is what I would do.
It sounds like it would be a very interesting life for sure.
Absolutely.
Is there some place you'd want to go first?
I would love to see the Grand Canyon. I would also love to travel to New York. It's on my bucket list to see some Broadway musicals. And I would also love to travel extensively in Europe.
Sounds like a great list of places. Arizona's a little easier to get to, though, from where you're living.
I think so.
Yes, not too long of a plane ride. One last question. In your own words, what does it mean to live a creative life?
For me, at this point in my life, to live a creative life really is kind of that meta idea of a reflective life. So to me, a reflective life is a creative life. And each day I'm finding new ways to be creative in my reflectivity, but be creative in the projects that I'm working on and the teaching that I do, as well as the physical life that I'm immersed in, whether it's working in my yard, planning. I grew up in a family where we grew flowers, and we were doing that kind of creative work in our yard and in my own home, and finding ways to inspire other people to be creative. So for me, a creative life really is a reflective life.
Wonderful. Cynthia, thank you so much for being on the show.
You are welcome. It has been a pleasure. I always enjoy our conversations. And so thank you for this opportunity to get to visit with you.
You're welcome. Listeners, you're in for a treat once Cynthia's podcast launches. Make sure to check her websites, which are listed in the show notes. Thanks, and keep listening. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.